and it was very quickly established as a hybrid attack, a clear attempt of the Lukashenko regime to use pressure on the European Union, on its external border, in order to intimidate us and to change our value-based, policy in terms of, supporting human rights people from Belarus, in terms of definitely pushing forward the sanctions regime. Now we're discussing the fifth already sanctions package in the European Union against the Lukashenko regime and his repressions against the people. We should remember that last August presidential elections, in many ways resulted in the biggest crackdown Belarus has ever seen, with still 800 political prisoners in prison, with 40,000 people detained and beaten up quite brutally. And the country has never been in such a bad shape in terms of human rights and democracy than today. And the dictator himself feels desperate to save his own political power. So in this situation, we cannot crack. We cannot be dissuaded, and we cannot give in to such a hybrid attack. Because if we do, as Lithuania, Poland, Latvia, or the European Union as a whole, then we allow other dictators and autocrats out there to use a similar weapon against us in the future. Therefore, it is also a matter of principle. And so far, we have kept the unity within the European Union. We have kept also the solidarity, and we have managed to mitigate the situation. But the crisis is far from over. Every day, there are hundreds of attempts of illegal crossing of the border.
You mentioned Lukashenko's desperate. The other way to see what he has done, of course, is that despite 4 rounds of sanctions and the incoming 5th round of sanctions, he has only become more strong and become more brutal. Does that show a lack of leverage from the West using sanctions over his regime?
I think we have to understand that sanctions is not, the policy in itself. It's not the solution. It's not the goal. It is only an instrument, and is an instrument of, with many other instruments in our arsenal. It is an important instrument because by that we show penalty, we show red card to the human rights violations. We have to do that as international community. By that we also try to deter further actions, as we've done, for instance, vis-a-vis Russia after the illegal annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbass, in order to deter Vladimir Putin, to go ahead with other possible military incursions in other Eastern Partnership countries. Here as well, the bigger our pressure is, the more likelihood is that the pain will be big enough for Lukashenko not to go ahead in intensifying the attack. Therefore, it's not only important to sanction individuals, which is now already the case, but also to move on sanctioning the entities and businesses, specifically also the airlines like Belarus, in order to also hit the regime at its heart. I think sanctions do matter, and they are painful to both Vladimir Putin and to Alexander Lukashenko, but they should not be our only solution. We should work double hard in supporting the civil society, independent media, and opposition. We should also be much more perhaps creative about using the organizations which have a mandate, a humanitarian and human rights mandate like OSCE, Red Cross, UN, and others, to intervene more forcefully, especially now with the humanitarian situation of the refugees, migrants in Belarus. So we should be engaged not only through sanctions, but also through other means.
You probably know where I'm going to go next, which is that critics would say Putin didn't pay too much of a price for Crimea. Lukashenko has no sign of abating what he's been doing, and there's little sign of anything that the West can do to actually change their behavior.
Well, it's true that we haven't used the full weight of our sanctions, and we have a lot in our pockets. In fact, the total weight of US and European sanctions are, very, very heavy. Could be very heavy.
Could be heavier.
On both Russia and Belarus, absolutely. But of course, there has always been a political decision not to go the full way in order not to target the common people. It has always been the philosophy to target the regime and to be very, specific in targeting the regime and the people around it, but not to harm the economy as such, in order not to harm the societies that could then also be more willing to support their regimes. I think, in the long term, our support through the sanctions regimes to the civil society is very important. We don't feel it here, sitting in Washington or in Brussels or in Vilnius, but people out there in Minsk, in Moscow and elsewhere, for them this is a sign that the West is caring for them and that the West is not withdrawing their attention from supporting those who are still longing and fighting for freedom.
I want to quickly ask about the U.S. because I put the European ambassadors on the hotspot, so I'll do the same here, and then maybe we'll get one question in. President Biden speaks like a transatlantic leader, no doubt, but the administration is very publicly focused on China. And as we just discussed in the previous panel, there has been some frustration in Western Europe, which frankly started years ago. So asking about your region, do you believe that the U.S. is focused enough on Eastern Europe? Has it been neglecting Eastern Europe?
Well, we are in Lithuania perhaps one of the most transatlantic countries in Europe, a big believer in the relationship, and of course, therefore, we always want more. More America in Europe, more American interest, more American troops, but of course, more friendship and understanding, more cooperation between the allies. Sometimes I joke that for us, a choice between Europe and America is impossible because it's like choosing between your mother and your father, between your family. It is your family. And in many ways, I think this, especially the recent events and the recent geopolitical tensions in terms of democracy and also technological race, climate crisis, etc., have shown that only if we are together, EU and US, we can maintain initiative, global initiative in terms of international rules-based system, in terms of trade, in terms of security, in terms of indeed climate and digital transformation. And I'm often reminded by the famous saying of, in fact, the first ambassador of the United States in Europe to France, Paris, who I'm talking about, Benjamin Franklin, who was saying, either we stick together or we are hanged separately. Right. And believe me, there are those forces out there who want to see us hanging separately.
Yeah, Vladimir Putin among them. All right, we have 2 minutes, so would anybody like to just try a quick question in the time we have left? No? Okay. Trudy, yeah, quick. Wait for the mic.
Trudy Rubin from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Is it a mistake to try to negotiate with Putin to control criminal hackers? Is it even conceivable that they are not authorized by Russian security services?
Great question. We're often discussing also in Europe about the extent of success of possible dialogue and engagement with Vladimir Putin. We had a very interesting debate in June when there was a proposal to resume high-level dialogues with Russia on the European Union level, and we were among the countries who have vetoed that proposal because we believe that it is not for the European Union and not for the United States in that respect, to take the first step, because we are not the ones who have violated international law and international agreements, who have, for the first time after the Cold War, annexed territories of other countries, and who have engaged in the game of deniability of those actions. So clearly, for us to take any step forward in terms of grading down the sanctions, and the sanctions also included the institutional sanctions, the formats, Russia's membership in G7 or previously G8, or indeed the high-level summits, it's not the time to do so. We also believe that dialogue by itself is not worth it. It has to be very clearly prepared, it has to have a clear objective, and it has to have two sides to tango. Both sides should be serious about it. And therefore, this tension also sometimes in the European Union between this willingness to dialogue and the reality of isolating the regime is omnipresent. But for the time being, we haven't seen much sense in dialogue. We have seen the visit, for instance, of the High Representative to Moscow, which was a serious attempt to have a dialogue, but the Russians themselves have done everything possible to convince even the biggest supporter of dialogue how dangerous it is to engage in such a dialogue with such a regime.
And he himself, I think, admitted afterward that it was a mistake. So on that note, thank you very much to all of you, and thank you very much. Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Nick. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We have had a long and very, very substantive day. From Chairman Milley starting us off, talking about this being a three-power world that's inherently less stable than what we've had before, including new technologies, to Nakasone warning us about what's happening in the cyberspace and actually sounding some notes of optimism, to Condoleezza Rice telling us about reminding us that the United States has the strongest military on the human capital side, but on the technology side, we may have some catching up to do with China and with others. We heard notes of optimism. Secretary Kerry beamed in from COP26 to tell us that there are very important agreements being made on climate change, ones that will hopefully tackle the most important national security threat of our time, climate change. We tried to raise during today some of the understudied issues. Space, which someone said was critical infrastructure. COVID, which has killed, as of this week, 5 million people, more than many, many recent wars, and shut down the world economy. We have talked about corruption and what role that played in the recent fall of Kabul to the Taliban, and how difficult that is in other places. We've talked about democracy. So we've really run the gamut from the Arctic and Antarctic to space, to Ukraine and Belarus, to Havana syndrome. It has been a wonderful day. Thank you, all of us here in person, and those of you online who are watching, who have stuck with us. Come see us again tomorrow for another full day of programming. And now comes the most important part, last but certainly not least. I want to give a huge thank you to our tiny but mighty team, to Neve King, to John Hogan, Deb Cunningham, Emily Lawrence, Kathleen Shea, Leah Batunis, Maya Rosales, who's on her second day on the job, and all of those from Aspen who helped us put this together. Thank you all very much. Everyone gets a well-deserved drink. And I have just one housekeeping note. If anyone is confused about the dinner you're going to, because we have people going to fun dinners around town tonight, please come see Neve King, who's right here in the front. Thank you, and we'll see you tomorrow. Good night.